Hello, and welcome to The Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Etterstein. Thank y'all for joining me tonight as we do the review for Chapter 12 from V.C. Kitchen's I Was a Pagan. Now, we did the reading out of this book. This was the original copy. And then I do my note-taking in this one just so I don't mark up the original. This is a facsimile reprint. This is available through Amazon. You can get copies of it if you're interested. It's literally just photocopies, almost facsimile reprints of the pages from the original. You can actually find quite a few copies of this original printing online if you look around, ranging in price depending on quality. But if you're like me and you feel like those old books got some energy left in them, that's why I get them. So I'm looking forward to it tonight. Please go ahead and give us a like, give us a subscribe. We are also on Facebook, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you want to go ahead and follow us there, that'd be fantastic. I'd really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and dig into it. This chapter was interesting because I feel like once you mix spirituality and money, people get a little weird, including myself, right? It's a little uncomfortable. Because money has been a primarily selfish thing for me for so long. It's been something I've used to define myself, something I've used to give myself worth and value. It's something that this world tells us we need to have or we're not important. So there's so much that goes along with this. And to bring spiritual principles into it, it's a little unnerving, right? Because that means we have to abide by certain standards rather than just do whatever the hell we want when we think it's appropriate for us. So bringing this spiritual perspective into our business life and our financial life, usually it's one of the last places it's brought in. You know, in the rooms of 12-step, I've heard many people say recovery is recovery, but business is business. And I'm not sure that's how it actually goes. According to V.C. Kitchen, that's not how it goes anyway. And I tend to agree with him a lot of the time on this stuff. So let's go ahead and we'll get into it. So chapter 12 is called This Business of Making a Living, and then Economics afterwards. And it was quite interesting what he opened with. He starts it out strong with talking about his real reason for choosing his profession. The first page of this is 169, and this, I think the second sentence. The truth is, however, that I was in business, not just to make a living, but a better living than the other fellow. So it wasn't only the selfish motive of financial security that he was going for, right? So what he's saying there is he not only wanted to be secure, he also wanted to be better than. Okay, right? I didn't realize that about myself right away. It took me a while to actually come to the understanding that not only did I want to make sure I was financially secure, but I wanted to use money and power as a way to garner respect and prestige among my colleagues and age group. And I wanted to use that for my own benefit. I wanted to make sure people knew I was doing well and even better than them. And that's kind of a horrible thing to actually think about, right? Like that I would rather, there's no real genuine intention there. There's no benefit or blessing. There's no kindness at all that gets wrapped up into that. And to realize that's what I was doing a lot of my life was a little scary. Because you just don't even necessarily know your motives until you take a look at it from this perspective, or you read something like this and you go, "Oh no, that's me. That's what I was doing." So it was just interesting. But I also love the way this chapter opens because it's where he talks about if everything, all property and money were divided equally, everybody would get a share of amounting to $2,500. That blows my mind. It's such a low number. With the amount of wealth there is today, the amount of property, the amount of possessions, material-wise, resources, just the money, printed money accounted for, right? There, It's so much more. It would be so much more than that. I don't know what it would be right now if he considered it the same calculation. But yeah, 2,500. This just shows the age of the book for sure. And then I think he said something about doubling it, right? It might take 100 years or more, for instance, just to double our present wealth and give everyone a claim of $5,000. I don't think it's that far away. I don't think that's or I think, excuse me, not that it's not that far away. I mean, that's a far ways back that we passed that number, right? One thing Kitchen didn't estimate well was the growth of industry here in the United States and the world, honestly. But so it's just interesting to kind of see the context and see the understanding. And especially this is right on the tail end of the Great Depression as well. So maybe that was an influence there. But no, it just shows the age of the book, right? And it's a little intense. It's a little intense. So I do want to go in right after that part of everyone claimed 5,000 where it might double. He talks about his mindset with money and business up until this point. And he says, I, however, did not want $2,500. I want nor 5,000, nor twice that amount again. I wanted 20 million. And remember, this is in the 30s. That is an incredible amount of money. Nothing less. And since new wealth could not be created fast enough to give me that amount in my own lifetime without taking from the existing limited supply away from someone else, I was quite ready and willing to do 4,000 or 5,000 people out of their shares in order for my personal desires to be satisfied. So, yeah, we want to talk about selfishness here, right? We want to talk about only taking into consideration his own desires and his own wants and what he's deemed his own needs. It's pretty clear what he was going for. It was pretty clear that he would strive for greed and excess at the sake of thousands of others, right? To build himself on the backs of others, to take when there's plenty for them, I do want to point out he's not talking about socialism right now. He's not talking about communism. He's not talking about anything like that. He's just taking the perspective and understanding that he will intentionally and purposefully make money in such a way to take from others, right? And it just really shows how selfish he actually is, how inconsiderate he actually is. And he didn't even feel guilty about it at all. He was just solely concerned with making himself feel confident, feel comfortable, right? And he goes in to talk about how he actually kind of felt superior. Well, if they didn't get the job, if they didn't put in the work, then they don't get the money. Which, to be fair, there's some truth in that. But the reality of it is you don't have to intentionally live to excess just so you feel better about yourself, right? Intention matters here. What you're actually doing and at the expense of things matters here. And I don't think people realize that. And he just kind of continues to go into how selfish he was and what that looked like. He talks about his business practices in advertising. I mean, and advertising is probably the most cutthroat and the most what's the word to use? Subliminally manipulative industries to go in. So you're making a living on convincing someone that the way you can present something will entice people into buying it, right? And he also goes into, he would use fear to manipulate his clients. Like, if you don't do this, your competitors are going to do this, and if they do this, you're going to go under, right? So he would use their own fear against them to manipulate them into buying it and to buying his own brand, because in the sense that if they don't go with Kitchen and his company, then they're going to just go under. They're going to fail. There's no way they don't, right? And in this way, he exaggerated prices. He stole pretty much from his customer. He took more than he needed. He took more than was appropriate, right? He scammed them at any point he could just to make his money. And he even manipulated them with liquor and women. I thought that was very funny for him to bring in there. And he pulled out all the stops just to make sure they felt that they could trust him, or that he was a great guy, or that they just got so overstimulated and so out of their mind that they would go with him, right? Like, these are extremely manipulative tactics to actually get wrapped up in and involved with. And he wanted so much control over this industry, over his own job. He said in this, let me see if I can find, I don't know if I highlighted it. I don't think I highlighted it, but he started his own business. So if push came to shove and things got worse, it wasn't to start a business out of moral integrity. It wasn't for any good reason, except for the fact that he wanted to be the last person to suffer in a bad time or a bad deal. He wanted to always have a scapegoat. How horrible to put someone's life in that balance, right? Like, I want to be in charge so I can control the purse strings, so I can control the hiring and the firing, so I can just always protect myself at the expense of everyone else's security and lives and their families. Didn't even take a moment to think of how that would impact anybody else, how that would potentially ruin someone's life just so he felt secure the way he wanted to feel secure. It's pretty crazy. And what's also interesting is he talks about seeing how hollow this way of living is. He talks about before having a spiritual experience, he realizes that this is just not working. He couldn't lie to himself. He started seeing through his own crap. Just to put it plainly, he says, finally, on page 172, I finally began to see through myself, and I tried accordingly to cover up by dignifying advertising, promoting it in my conversation, at least, from the ranks of a game to the ranks of a profession. I referred to the high standards which have made good advertising an economic and social force of vital importance. Right. So he starts even trying to lie to himself. He starts to see how it's just a sham, how it's just the way he runs business is just a joke, right? He's a snake oil salesman. He's just making people scared to buy his product at the expense of his own integrity and morality, and at the expense of other people's livelihoods. That's pretty intense. Pretty intense realization. So after he realizes that, he tries to make himself feel better, right? He's trying to say, well, but this is an important part of living. You know, I think we talked about it earlier on in one of the earlier chapters, how he tried to like make himself feel good about what he was doing, and that that the advertising industry was a crucial part of the American dream, right? It was a crucial part of living, and it needed to be fostered, and it needed to be nurtured and taken care of, right? And this is what he's talking about here as well, that this just needs to happen, you know, like we need to have advertising here because it's what we're going to grow with. It's how we're going to actually get through all of this and whatever. But eventually that failed too, right? He realized that his practices just were not going to be anything he could live with himself with. Now that's a little unnerving when you realize that. When you come to your own realization that the way you live and the way you conduct business is actually so disingenuous it bothers you, right? And you can't even lie to yourself about it. There's something going on there. And he didn't even have a wake-up call at that point. He just kept doing what he was doing. He just then, after realized what he was doing was the problem, was hollow and shallow and harmful, he tried to convince himself of the need for the industry. And then he, after that failed, because the delusion failed, so after he couldn't actually buy into his own crap, he started blaming the other participants as to why he was like this, right? Like doing anything but taking accountability for himself. He's saying, I'm only like this because the whole industry is like this. So let's, you know what? We're going to try to make this whole industry change. All right, I'm going to build this plan that allow the entire industry to change so we can all practice correctly, because I can't practice honestly if they aren't practicing honestly. He's putting it back and forth like that, right? Now, that's what a victim mentality that is. How that blame game is so easy to fall into. It's so simple to actually allow yourself to buy into it, because then all responsibility is taken off your shoulders, isn't it? Right? Like that's why people love to blame, right? Because the changing of a behavior and a mindset is difficult, but to blame, saying it's your fault that I feel this way or your fault that I behave this way, puts the onus on someone else to do the difficult thing and change. So he's saying, hey, the industry needs to change. It needs to have integrity in advertising, right? You can't oversell. You can't do this. You can't swamp the market. You can't undercut each other. You can't do all of these things. And he takes it, makes himself a martyr and this self-righteous person and starts to build this plan. He's like, you know what? This is what we're going to do. We're going to fix it. And I'm going to build this economic plan to better the advertising industry. And he just turns into this dictator, right? He talks, there's a passage in here where he talks about how, you know what, and we're going to force people to do this because if they just obviously don't know what's best for themselves. So us that know need to take care of it, right? Like this high and mightier than thou type of attitude that he's wrapped himself up in is pretty incredible, actually, when you think about it. He just can't get over himself. And he turned, this advertising dictator with imposing fines and jail time and prison time on people and just telling them that they've got to start or it's not going to work, and they're going to get punished for it because he knows better. VC Kitchen knows the way to fix the advertising company. So he eventually loses hope in that too. He knew it was impossible because he had come to understand the driving factor of almost everybody that works, but especially the people in the advertising industry, is to selfishly acquire things for themselves, for their own selfish desires and their selfish securities and their own greed and prestige. So he's trying to figure this thing out. He's trying to fix this whole advertising thing so he can be honest. Right? Because heaven forbid he actually is just honest and see what happens. He actually has to dictate that the industry change to allow him to be honest first, right? Because he's not going to be one that actually takes the hit first. It's going to be the whole thing. Everyone needs to participate, right? He doesn't want to be alone in this thing. So he knew it was going to fail, though, because of that. So he tried to play to that almost. He said, okay, well, if everyone needs to get something out of this whole thing, right? Like what's better than money or material commodity? And he came up with knowledge, that broker in knowledge. And that'll give people an unending supply to go after. There's no end to the accumulation. And, it was an interesting concept, I guess, but he failed to mention how he would implement that. besides just shaming and forcing people to do it. But what was interesting is he admits his obsession with it. Like on, I think it's page 176, if we look. Yeah, we're actually going to read the quote. Kitchen was really starting to obsess about fixing this because he couldn't keep going on the way he was, right? It makes me believe that he was, it was weighing on his conscience, really. Like the lack of integrity, the dishonesty, the manipulative tactics, the cutthroat behaviors between companies, and all of those things, just the way he's behaving, the way he wants to figure it out. I do believe that this was something that was, truly weighing on his conscience that he wanted to stop. Which, I mean, it shows he has a soul in there somewhere, a spirit in there somewhere that's gnawing at his conscience, right? Hence the drinking, hence the womanizing, hence the greed, right, for security. So he was trying to figure out any way to resolve it, and he was getting a little crazy with it. Then he says the Oxford group saved his sanity, saved him from insanity, saved his sanity, and what's interesting is they said, yes, they gave him this this understanding that it's not money or material, but it's not knowledge or intellect either. It's spiritual growth, spirituality, a spiritual currency, I believe, is what he says that was needed to be desired. So on page 176, I'm going to read a quote here. It goes into 177. It's the last paragraph, 176. I think I might have gone a little mad on this subject had I not met the Oxford group and learned not a material economy, not an intellectual economy, but the spiritual economy of Christ. This experience confirmed the fact that men are made honest neither by the adaptation of new laws or of new systems, nor by the adoption of new ideals. They are made honest for a love for God discovered through Jesus Christ. Again, this person's a devout Christian at this point. And I love that line in there, though. The experience confirmed the fact that men are made honest neither by the adoption of new laws or the new systems, right? So being involved in an institution that demands honesty won't work if a man has not decided to be honest. Legislating honesty will not work if a person does not want to be honest, right? So then that goes for all virtue and all principle, right? Punishments really only go so far in managing a culture or managing people, because at some point there has to be a shift in the spiritual nature. So they desire to actually change. Without that desire to change, nothing's going to happen. So they are made honest through a love for God. So a spiritual experience, that's what the 12 Steps talks about. That's what the Oxford group tries to invoke. That's what religion tries to invoke, really. All types of religion. To actually have this connection with a God of your understanding, the spiritual realm, whatever that might be for you, that power, that source, that creator, Mother Nature, right? You need to have an experience with that. The fact forced home the knowledge that if I wanted to do anything of economic value in the world, I would have to give up my aim of making a better living than the other fellow. That's what he said he was always trying to do, right? I would have to give up the rest of my days to be used primarily to bring people to Christ and thus build better men. So he has to change the intention of which he is practicing his trade, right? He has to change the reasoning for doing what he's doing. So instead of just making money to make money or making money to feel better than the next guy or be more affluent or whatever it is, he's saying he has to make his priority and his intention in life to build better men. So we've talked about it a lot here on this podcast, but to switch from being of service to yourself only, so you only take actions that serve yourself and further your own agenda, to change that to a selfless mindset, to be of service to the God of your understanding and others, is what happens in these spiritual experiences. That is what happens when someone actually engages in spiritual work and spiritual growth, right? That juvenile, tired, immature way of thinking that the world has to make me comfortable and I need to just take from the world whatever I can needs to change. And it changes to be God and others centered. That's the shift that happens. I think A Course in Miracles calls that that shift is the miracle in that spiritual practice. To be God-centered instead of self-centered. And it's kind of amazing to realize that's what he has to do even in his business life. And he didn't say, I needed to make more money to help more people. He said, I needed to build better men. I needed to help others, not financially, right? Because we're talking about work and this stuff, but he's just saying my goal needs to be to help and build better men. Now that's pretty significant change in perspective right there, isn't it? Right? That's like a complete shift from, hey, I'm just out for me to I want to give and put into the world. That's a miracle. He had to change his aim. He had to change his direction. He had to change his purpose and his intention. Selfish to selfless is where we need to land. And what he actually says next, this work is in all other cases, as in all other cases, we've talked a lot about it now, had to start not with the other fellow. We like everyone else to change. Like we said, the world can change, then I'll feel better, right? Not with my advertising competitor, not with the other fellow, but with myself. Christ could not make me morally contagious. Other businessmen could not catch honesty, unselfishness, love, and purity from me unless I possessed those qualities myself. And I found that the power and knowledge that God gave me, it was possible to apply these qualities in business, even in the business of the pagan world, right? So he's starting to realize, because of his connection with the Oxford group and because of the impact of that, it's actually made on him, that he can bring all of that spirituality into his business. He doesn't know what it's going to look like, but he knows he can at least try. Now that's amazing. Excuse me. And it's, if you remember when he first had an experience with the Oxford group, they talked to him about his work. And one of his biggest reservations is, I'm in advertising. How am I supposed to actually do this, right? How am I actually supposed to make a living if I can't lie, right? Advertising is just lying. Advertising is not honest. And he talks about how God showed him how it could be different. This is on page 177, the last paragraph here, if you're following along. When I first drew back from the Oxford group's challenge, for instance, I told them it would be utterly impossible to go back and start being honest in the advertising business. That was an evasion on the face of it, right? Because he just wanted to do what he wanted to do. He was trying to dodge the question, dodge the principle, dodge the practice. I meant simply that it would be difficult, embarrassing, and probably unprofitable. So it wouldn't serve him in any way and make him look bad. So he didn't want to do it. God showed me, however, that it was not only possible to be honest in advertising, but to be unselfish, loving, and pure, which is, if you've been following along with that theme, he keeps saying those are the four absolutes of the Oxford group: unselfishness, honesty, love, and purity. So, and then he started to begin to talk about the miracles. He paid his partner back for all the money he stole out of the expense account, that he it swindled away. And then he talks about how he found a check for the exact amount that he was supposed to, or that he wrote to pay back the expense account, the check he had forgotten about, which I thought that was pretty much a miracle. First of all, he forgot about the check, plus then it was the exact amount. That's amazing, actually. An absolute miracle for that to happen. And when he starts to be willing to bring this in, that is when things start to change for him, And he says here, also, after that Czech experience, he said, the next day he guided me to open a magazine I seldom read and to turn directly to a page in a paragraph, which gave me the suggestion as to how I could be wholly honest in the advertising that I wrote. So God started putting the needed information and the needed actions in his path as he went along. And it just started falling into place for him. And he didn't even know that's what was going on. All right? Like, that's the coolest thing about it. He didn't even realize it was happening. It's just amazing to me. And he just kept following those lines. He kept following the suggestions. He kept following the guidance he was receiving during his meditations or whatever it might be. So he began to stop using these manipulative practices. He stopped using fear to manipulate people. He stopped using liquor and women and nightclubs, I think is the term he used the second time. He stopped behaving the way he used to. He stopped trying to steal other customers. He stopped having resentment at the other companies that would steal his customers. Now, that's an amazing thing, right? You mess with someone's money, usually there's a resentment in the works at least, right? But he didn't even hold on to that anymore. He let that all go. And I find that it's a testament to the power of this, right? It's a testament to how important bringing spirituality in is. Because if you don't, you're going to remain trapped to those passions, trapped to those insecurities, trapped to those resentments, because that's all you know. And that's the only way you know how to operate in that world, right? So he stopped being so selfish and manipulative. He stopped harming other people in those ways. He stopped being resentful. And he also started to be more selfless. It says he took a 10%, or he took a pay cut of 90%. He was making 10% of what he used to, and he was only working part-time. But he wasn't doing that because he wanted more free time. He was doing it because that allowed him to keep more people on staff. He sacrificed his own income stream, his own salary, to ensure others could keep working. He said he could have just cut them and taken over their work, but he let them continue. What an incredible shift from get as much money as I can, start my own company so I can fire anybody that I want to at any time, to, you know what, I'm going to take a significant pay reduction just to ensure that those two people can continue to work. And I don't got to cut them. I find that miraculous as well. All right. I'm going to read this next part, though. The most remarkable result of all, however, is that, faced for the first time in my career with any real cause to fear for myself and family financially, all anxiety and fear was flown out of the window, never to return. God has time and time again vindicated this faith in him by taking care of our needs as each such need is arisen. Banks have closed, but God has always kept open for us some way to live. So faith, right? Faith in this practice is essential as well. Because I can guarantee you it's not going to go as smooth as you want it to in the beginning, right? You're changing, your relationships are changing, your dynamics are changing, whether it's with your business partner, with your coworkers, with your employer, with your customers or patients, whoever you're working with, right? It's a practice of faith, right? To actually go through and do all of that. It's a practice of faith to walk in those principles and know that it's best to live that way and potentially be broke than to betray your integrity and your sense of self and go against God's will for you, right? And to be selfish. So faith is a big part of this, right? You have to have faith when you bring each and every part of this into your life. You don't get to just practice it in one area, right? In the 12th step of 12-step programs is in practice these principles in all our affairs, right? You bring a new way of living everywhere and suddenly everything changes, right? And which is a message I need to hear. There's a lot of things that go on in my life that I do well with, but there's still a few things that I don't. And it's because I lack faith that doing the right thing is going to work out. And I know that, and I still screw up. So I am not perfect. I want y'all to remember that when I'm on this podcast. He also talked about how besides just the manipulation going down and the lack of pretty much bribery he was using, he started to say instead of just wanting to get his work approved, meaning like the customer to sign off on it, he wanted to actually improve his work. He wanted it to be something the customer wanted, something the customer was involved with, right? So he actually started to the way he viewed his work and what he was doing within his practice of advertising was changing. And he wanted it to get better, not just good enough. So instead of it being simply a way for him to make money and have security, it turned into him being something he wanted to invest himself in because it was an extension of who he was. Now, to come to that realization is a pretty significant one. Excuse me. So he started to see all of these changes, and his job actually improved. His life started to improve, and he says he was the most financially at risk at this time, but he was the most comfortable. Now, that's not saying money's bad either. Money is not the devil. It's the love of money that's an issue, right? When you prioritize and value money more than anything else, and that sense of security that it provides you, that's an issue, right? And that was an issue VC Kitchen struggled with, is he put money as his god for a very long time, prestige as a god for him for a very long time, right? So he could stand on his little judgment box and feel better about himself. Now, that's a little bit scary, but he changes that. He grows in his life and his plans, and he begins to develop a different way to live. So he starts to talk about how he begins to ask God to plan his day and how he begins to use his spiritual practice to actually grow in that knowledge and understanding of God that he wants to have. And he has this desire to seek and do God's will in all areas of his life, in his job and his marriage now, with his children, with the people he helps, society, all of these things. And he talks also about how just entire companies are given over to this idea, to practice in this way. To allow God as much as possible, to invite God in to run the show, right? And the spiritual growth that comes with that is incredible, I'm sure. He talks about also how the Oxford group stretches cross continent internationally, and how there's all these different types of people. He talks about the New York Stock Exchange, Curb Exchange, gas prospector, engineer, banker, all these members of the Oxford group. They get together and they talk about how to bring God into their jobs and their employment and their places of business more when they're together. And he talks about how you could catch them in their office at any time of day, and you'll be just as likely to find them discussing business as they might be discussing God and discussing spirituality and discussing how to grow in integrity and understanding. What an incredible organization to be a part of at that time, I'm sure. To see people actually have a desire to seek and do God's will in all areas of their life, and to find a collection of people to do that. And people that were just as willing to talk to someone about God as business is unheard of today. It's absolutely unheard of today. And I do think it's a practice we need to get back to talk about spirituality growth. We need to bring more of that truth into this world. So, yeah, he talks about how it's Philadelphia, New York City, Paris, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, like all different continents, all different countries, all different places of the world. And he closes it with this. I want to read the last, paragraph, and half of the last paragraph, I guess is the best way to say it. But all have found the same answer. All these different people, all these different places, and all these different countries around this world have found the same answer. That the only permanent, stable, and worthwhile change in economic conditions will come, not primarily through any change in laws, not primarily through any change in economic systems, but first of all through the change in businessmen. The people that practice the business have to change first. You can't legislate it. You can't rebuild the system with people that only want to do the same thing. They have to change. Each individual has to change. They have found that no matter how this surface conduct may be forced to conform, right? So the superficial, I'll do what you want right now, just to check a box and get my way. A racketeer at heart will remain a racketeer until his heart is changed. You have to change here. You have to change within yourself. You don't do it just to look good. You do it because you know it's the right thing to do. That living the other way is a hollow, painful, miserable existence, regardless of how much money you have. Your heart has to change. And then you bring that change with you in all areas of your life, and specifically business, in this chapter. They have found that until they give themselves their whole hearts to this limitless quest of spiritual growth, men will continue to pursue the selfish quest of wealth, right there, or will find themselves caught in the dreary, drab routine of a socialized control. All right? Those are the two options. If you don't have a spiritual solution, you either go completely crazy with just getting for yourself, or it turns into socialism, and no one has any drive for growth anymore of any type, of any way. They have found that a personal experience of Jesus Christ is the only thing that sets men's hearts on this limitless economy. The value changes is what he's talking about. We talked earlier in the chapter how he wanted to change the value to be knowledge and intelligence, but the value is a connection with God, and he speaks specifically through Jesus Christ. But again, I want this to stay open for whoever is watching it, wherever you are, with whatever belief structure you have and God you have. But that pursuit and that engagement with the God of your understanding is the only way that you can have this change of heart. And then to start prioritizing a spiritual lifestyle, not anything superficial or material. It's a whole different way to live. They have found, as I have, that they cannot give men this unimaginable and vital experience until they have had it themselves. This stuff is spread through example and shown through integrity. The thing with spirituality, it isn't something that you can say, do as I say, not as I do with, because it loses all effect. It loses all power and influence. Spirituality has to be manifested before it becomes able to be shared. So, all right. That's it for this chapter. Thank y'all for joining me. It was a hard chapter to go through. It was so much good stuff, and it's still this is something I still work on. I'll be honest with you, and to mesh those two is a very big act of faith. So, but I'm grateful for y'all going with me on the journey with this, and The next chapter, chapter 13, dun dun dun, is the business of New Deal's politics. Of course, chapter 13 is about politics. So I will get you the chapter reading up next week, and we will go from there. So thank you all for joining me this evening, and until next time, thanks.